Hello, everyone, and welcome now to day 16, chapter number 16, reading the 40 chapters of Exodus during the 40 days of Lent. I'm quite aware that this video is going out much later, significantly later in the day than usual, but all of my fans have been on the edge of their seats, holding their breath and waiting today. And so, even though it's about 12 hours later, here we are. And we'll credit it to my travel fatigue as I returned from Atlanta very tired today. All right, in chapter number 16, where we left off, the great song of Israel's celebration and hope. Then the miracle, the bitter water that was turned into fresh water. And now here we have in chapter number 16 another fundamental element of this Exodus situation. In fact, before I get into all of that, I do want to mention somebody had mentioned from chapter number 14 a couple of days ago that there it talks about the angel of God and the cloud of God moving back and forth between between Pharaoh and the Israelites. And that was something that I wanted to address that day, but it had slipped my mind over the course of the video. I don't have any real precise comments, but I'm glad to make some suggestions here. That this idea of the angel of God, we see throughout Genesis, these angels of the Lord that were some sort of divine representatives. I know that some people will say, well, the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament means Jesus, who's active in doing something in the Old Testament. I don't agree with that whatsoever. However, if you do, then that's quite all right. And then with this pillar of cloud, and this dark cloud that was moving, it's some mysterious language. What we're going to see is, as they continue on in the Exodus, they're going to move and they're going to be directed by this cloud during the day that directs them, and this pillar of fire by night that's going to move them. And so this, what we find here in chapter number 14, is more of the introduction to what's going to be observed as they continue to travel that wilderness land. This fire and this cloud. Remember when God came to Moses, or really when God solicited Moses to come to him, there was this burning bush, this bush that was on fire, that was made evident by way of the smoke, I'm sure, but yet it was not consumed. And then very soon, in the next week, I think it is, we will see that some more fire imagery. And so maybe this will give us something to consider and develop as we continue to approach this type of imagery going forward. All right, so into our text today, chapter number 16. They journeyed through from Elim to the wilderness of Sin, and there they became hungry. They murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness once more, making a statement, if only we had just stayed in Egypt, there at least we have food. Now we're out in the wilderness, and we're going to die out here. Clearly, there's this depiction of an ungrateful group. It is the theological depiction, but psychologically, I mean, can we not understand that this is part of their group formation and identity that's very pertinent. Taking a people who, for generations, they have been in Egypt 430 years, and now that they are free, there is a process that is going to be required in order to wean them off of Egypt and eradicate that Egyptian presence within them. Yes, it was much easier in Egypt. They knew their role. They knew where their food was coming from. It was a certain order that was there in the chaos, as it were. But what God's calling them into, their new identity, is something they have to form, and that becomes very challenging. Trying to re-identify self, reformulate their organization and their values. The easiest thing to do is not to meet the challenge, but to go back to Egypt. And so in verse number 4, here God is going to rain bread from heaven. But they have to get the amount for that day. They're not going to stockpile this food. It's going to be a testing point, it says. They're going to learn to trust in God. But also remember, what were they doing in Egypt? Pharaoh was clearly stockpiling. We see that starting at the end of Genesis, leading into Exodus. The exploitive economy of Pharaoh was stockpiling excess. We're not going to do that. When God makes the bread, here there's going to be enough for everyone, and they don't need to stockpile it because they're going to celebrate a Sabbath day. We'll get into that, I think, next week. But they're going to collect more on the 6th day, so they have it for the 7th. But we're not going to use God's bread as a way to exploit. When we look in the Christian paradigm, there, the Lord's Prayer, give us today our daily bread. There's some echoes of that. And so verse 6, this is a sign. In the evening you will know that God has brought you out of Egypt, because in the morning you're going to see the glory of the Lord. He heard your murmurings, and you're going to see this bread there to satisfy you. God is taking this personally, albeit that there's going to be some patience given to the people. The world of the Bible was one where food was rarely in excess, and when there was excess there at that time, then you had to store it up for a time when there would be famine. And so what they lived is preparing for there to be a shortage. Again, Exodus written on the heels of Genesis, there was a huge shortage there, and that's what brought the Hebrews to Egypt during a time of significant shortage. Here, God's economy, as it were, his food program is going to work. There's going to be a sufficient amount that they're not going to need to store it up, but there's going to be a test here. It's hard when you've had little, and you've been ingrained in you to take and store, to retrain self, and so that's going to be an intriguing situation. But what happens? They grow discontent with this kind of bread, and they want more, and so now quail is going to come. It's a certain kind of bird that migrates. They're going to come and they're going to land there, and they're going to be available for meat. And so God is not only going to give them bread, but God is going to give them meat. But again, There's going to be this provision. And more than just testing the people, it's a provision against greed. The earlier part of Exodus here, there's very much about Pharaoh's greed. Some of the laws that we're going to get into, I think, next week are very much about greed. And so rather than them becoming greedy over this, they're going to practice self-control, being content with their day's worth. However, some of them decide to keep it and hold on to it. And the next day it was full of worms, this quail and manna, and it began to stink. Moses was angry with them, and so then he decided to gather it for them. What a responsibility he's put in. He's trying to advocate for the people and keep them out of harm's way. So he's going to gather it up and distribute it. Okay, this video is already going over, but what we see here in repetition, this cessation of work on the Sabbath. They're not going to gather this food on the Sabbath. The commandment will be further developed later on, but for now, think about this. This is a contrast. Pharaoh, remember in Exodus 1, it kept saying he worked them harder. He would not give them a break. Here, God's economy is going to be one where there is a Sabbath, there is a time of break, there is a time of rest. They don't have to overwork in order to collect their goods, because there's going to be enough for all. In fact, Moses is going to distribute it all. Here it sounds a whole lot like a primitive form of socialism here. And they're going to keep a portion of this manna, and it's going to serve as a monument, a testament to generations going forward, that this is what God has done. And it says they're going to place it in the ark of testimony for safekeeping. This idea and concept will be developed more going forward. So, verse 35, the Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came into the land that they inhabited. Here God fed them for 40 years. God wasn't going to do less than what Egypt was going to do, that's for sure. But what he does is a whole lot more during this period of 40 years where they have to get out of Egypt and get Egypt out of them in order to hopefully form their own identity. All right, this video is considerably long already. I'll go ahead and send it out. Thank you all.